Okay, good evening, members. The 6:30 is upon us, so we may as well make a start. I don't have to read out the blurb anymore for the online rules and regulations. So all I say is welcome everybody to this evening's Scrutiny Committee. My name's Councillor Osborne and I'm the Chairman. So, first item on the agenda, minutes. Do I have your authorisation to sign the minutes of the meetings held on the 21st of November and the 28th of November as correct records of those proceedings?
Move.
Thank you very much. Item 2, apologies and substitutes. I have apologies from Councillor Earl Williams, and a substitute this evening will be Councillor Mary Barnes. There she is. Nothing else, Lisa? I think we're all here otherwise. Item 3, additional agenda items. There are none. Disclosure of interest. Anybody feel they have to make any disclosure of interest? Quite possibly not, but then if it comes up near the agenda item you think you're going all wrong, then declare as you feel fit. Item 5, Robert Health Wellbeing and Leisure Facilities Strategy, pages 2 to 23. We have Rachel Fowler, who you know worked on this for us. She's joined us remotely rather than driving from who knows where in a frosty, cold, dank evening. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you.
So, where are we? Deborah, there we are, Deborah. What do we got to do this evening? Purpose of the report, present the results of the public consultation on the draft Health and Wellbeing Leisure Facilities Strategy for consideration and amendments prior to final approval of the strategy by Cabinet and then obviously on to full Council. Recommendation resolved that Cabinet be requested to recommend to Council the draft Robert Health and Wellbeing Leisure Facilities Strategy be approved and adopted. Deborah, over to you.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you say, this report presents the results of the public consultation. If you remember, Rother District Council undertook to review the leisure requirements across the district for longer term planning, 10 years plus going into the future. And this was once demand for leisure services and the financial climate became clearer following COVID. This strategy is to be considered in conjunction with the wider playing pitch and leisure facility strategy, which is currently being undertaken jointly by the planning teams of both Rother District Council and Hastings Borough Council. And what they're doing will inform and ensure that the new local plan reflects residents and sports clubs' requirements across the district. So the two are interlinked, and Rachel has worked with Continuum, who are leading on the playing pitch and leisure strategy across Hastings and Rother District Council to make sure that they all align. The draft strategy that we completed the public consultation on was approved by Cabinet on the 31st of October 2022 and then went for this public consultation via an online survey during November and December. The consultation sought comments and feedback on all aspects of the strategy, but most particularly the strategy's vision, key principles, aims and objectives, the role of the town and parish councils as partners in the leisure services. So I'm going to hand over now to Rachel Fowler, Managing Director of Strategic Leisure, to present the key results of the consultation and her findings as set out in Appendix A to this report. So over to you, Rachel. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. I'll just upload the presentation. Sorry, let me just, I had it up a minute ago. Just, here we are. Yeah, that should just be uploading. Deborah, can everybody see that? Is that coming up? No. Oh, hang on. Yes, it is. Sorry. It's just taking a while to load. I'll be with you in a second. Okay. Great. Okay.
Sorry, Rachel.
Thanks very much.
Sorry, Rachel, to intervene. It might help if you turn off your video whilst doing the presentation. It might help with bandwidth issues.
Okay, no worries, Ben. Thank you. Okay, is that better? Can everyone hear me? Okay. So, as Deborah said, councillors, this is just to present the findings of the second public consultation on the strategy. So just to remind you of the kind of background and rationale for the strategy, Rother has a number of issues to think about in relation to its future leisure provision. Some of these are the three main issues are the ageing built leisure facilities that need some investment. Your current leisure operators contract ends in just over 12 months, and also clearly a priority need to support residents in improving health and well-being in their everyday lives through leisure activities that can take place indoors and outdoors. And since COVID, obviously the ability to use outdoor spaces and places has become even more important. In terms of the process that we went through...
Excuse me, Rachel, your slides aren't changing, just to let you know.
Right, sorry, let's try that again. Is that better? Has that come through now? Can you see the second one, Deborah?
Yes, we can see it now.
Yeah. Okay, right. Okay. Sorry. So just also to remind members about the process that we went through for the strategy. So we obviously spent quite a lot of time in the district. We've audited the facilities to identify quality and their condition. We've done extensive consultation, both community and also with agreed key stakeholders, town and parish councils, schools, clubs, etc. And that consultation process was also developed so that there wouldn't be any overlaps or duplication with the work undertaken by Continuum. So the two pieces of work have helped to inform each other. We then obviously carried out analysis of the consultation feedback and developed the strategy from that. So in terms of the feedback for you tonight, just to give you some headline feedback, there were a total of 685 consultation responses. You can see down there the breakdown of them, and the detailed consultation results, as Deborah said, can be seen at Appendix A, which mentions kind of a lot of individual feedback, but these are the overview. So you can see that there's quite a good spread of results. In terms of the actual breakdown, of the actual individual areas that we asked about. So the first question we asked was whether people agreed with the vision that was in the draft strategy, and I've included the vision there for members just for easy reference. I think it's fair to say degree of support for that vision. So we had 84% of responses supported the vision and 16% disagreed to some extent or other with vision. But as I said, the majority of responses supported it. And some of the disagreement was perhaps because people didn't actually answer that question. So that's counted as a disagreement, but also they thought that perhaps the vision wasn't wide enough or should include other specific elements. All of these are picked up in Appendix A. In terms of the next question, so we asked whether people supported the overall, let me just find my slide, sorry, the overall key principles, underpinning the vision. Those again you can see up in front of you, members. I'm not going to read them all out for you, but again it's important to say that 83% of all the responses received supported these principles, only 17% disagreed. In terms of the strategy aim, again we had 89%, I think it's 89, isn't it? 88% of responses agreed or strongly agreed with the aims, and only 12% of responses disagreed. And you can see the aims actually up there on the slide in front of you. So I think it's fair to say that overall there's an overwhelming response. For those people that did disagree on the aim, there were some mentions about the temporary pool closure at Rye, and some people have concerns about liaising with town councils or leisure facilities having a limited offer for people with a disability. But overall, as I say, there was support for the aim. In terms of the objectives, again, we had 82% of responses agree with the objectives and 18% disagree. And then in terms of the town and parish councils, being the important partners, 59% of responses agreed with that, but there was a higher level of disagreement at 41%. The reasons for those disagreement really were quite varied. Several were concerned about, again, closure of Rye swimming pool. Other people mentioned things like the fact that this could add another layer of bureaucracy and potentially cost to provision, and that really leisure provision should be provided by the local authority. I think obviously there isn't always the level of knowledge about whether a service is discretionary or not at local authority level, and that can often lead to feedback like this in response to town and parish councils. Okay, so in terms of, I think just again to say that overall we think we've had a really good response to the consultation and overwhelming support for the strategy as it was debated last autumn. In terms of anything missing from the strategy, just to headline a few areas, people picked up on Rye Pool, costs and funding, issues about parking, transportation, need for financial support from clubs, some issues about pollution, disability access, better use of footpaths, inclusivity and accessibility, and the use of community centres. But overall, when I went back through the strategy, all of these are mentioned to some extent or another. It's just that people were making specific comments about they thought they should have a higher profile or more emphasis on them. And I'll come back to these in a second. Other areas that were raised by respondents as they thought was missing from the strategy are on this slide, and here we had things like people felt that there should have been more local research, that there should have been more responses from clubs and particularly groups that support those with disabilities. I think it's important on that point to highlight the fact that we did send questionnaires and reminders to all local clubs in the district, and they were chased for responses. And I know that Continuum have also chased local clubs for responses. So the opportunity was there for people to respond. And obviously groups that support those with disabilities, we did have feedback from them. Other things that people raised were the fact that the strategy doesn't specifically pick up on running or nutrition or running tracks and other points listed there in that box. I think, again, that a strategy needs to be a fairly high-level document, and the space for those specific recommendations or points to be raised is probably in an implementation plan or an action plan once the strategy has been adopted. Other issues raised by people were cost of using facilities, the need perhaps for private sector partnerships, more provision for cycling. There's a number of different bike-related points made there. Improvement to grass pitches, that's specifically picked up in the playing pitch strategy. And then, again, the need for more support for clubs and the volunteers who work for them. And then the 4 points at the bottom, some people raised the need for the strategy to mention more about equality of opportunity and inclusivity, the need for improved signage to facilities, and the importance of swimming for older people. The last box there, I think it's important that we had some really good responses from the active partnership, and they particularly wanted to raise the opportunities for closer working with them through the final strategy. Okay, and so just to move on to the final slide, really just to summarise again, councillors, that the results that we've had show that there's overwhelming support for the strategy as drafted, and that perhaps we could add in some reflection on those gaps that people identified, and I'm suggesting that we could add those in at paragraph 5.3 in the strategy, where we where there's already feedback on previous consultation, but I don't feel that there's a need to introduce any additional recommendations at this stage, because the points that have been raised as missing, or the fact that they need more emphasis in the strategy, are already covered by the existing recommendations. So if I add them in in section 5.3, there will be a link back then between the sort of points for implementation and the points raised. So again, so based on the feedback, that's my suggestion really, that we add them in, but we don't change the recommendations.
Is that it, Rachel?
Yes, that's it, Chairman. Yeah, I'm happy to take any points or discussion. I've tried to be as quick as possible.
Okie dokie, thank you very much. One thing I've picked up on social media recently, due to the fact that it probably hasn't stopped raining for the last 3 months, a lot of the sort of football pitches locally, especially in the villages, where the sort of youth football teams use, they've sort of flooded them and they're too wet for the kids to play on. So now everybody's saying, oh, we should have more 3G sports pitches. Now I understand that Sidley will be getting a new one with their recent bid, so that's lucky. But also see that you sort of, you know, even when after the local sports clubs trying to get response, but now it almost seems as if they're too late. It was a bit drier then, and it wasn't in their radar as much as it is now, in that their kids can't play football on a Sunday morning or train because they're losing themselves in the mud. So, yeah, maybe if we could, whether that's down to us to we put that in there or what, I don't know, to be honest.
So, Chairman, just on that, the separate playing pitch strategy has audited all playing pitches in the district, and football pitches will have been audited during the winter, so they will have been seen in kind of their worst state, if you like, their worst condition. I've read the draft playing pitch strategy, which is with the council for comment at the moment, and it does identify specific pitches where there's a need for investment in drainage or investment in other ways of improving the quality of the pitches. So I think whether the clubs responded to the strategy I've worked on or not, the issues that you've just mentioned are picked up in the playing pitch strategy.
That's good. That's good then. So that, yeah, excellent. Any questions? Oh, loads. Well, let's start with Councillor Coleman first.
Thank you, Chair. I think the first thing I wanted to comment on was about the fact that only 1% of respondents were in the 18 to 24 bracket. I was actually in that bracket when I started at this council, not anymore. I think it's just important to make sure that we don't forget that group of people and younger as well, who maybe don't get as much voice in these consultations. Obviously, we know our main demographic in Rother is of an older age, but we don't want all of our facilities to be catered for that market and ignore sort of younger people who maybe want more social-based activities, more sort of competitive things, more sort of group-based things, more sort of technology incorporating things, and more affordable things as well. But I think the strategy does cover quite a lot of that pretty well. I think there is a good emphasis on younger people in that. So I'm not too worried about that. The other comment I wanted to make about the demographics of the respondents is actually it's quite interesting that the distribution of ethnic backgrounds is actually quite similar to the distribution of ethnic backgrounds in Rother, based on the last census. So I think that's quite good. Obviously, it's good to have a good diverse range of opinions and views from people. I thought that was interesting to comment on. And the final thing I wanted to comment on was about the Rye Pool situation. Obviously, that's got quite a large number of responses about that. And although I get that we can't necessarily sort of mention a specific now time issue in a longer strategy, I wonder if there could be more in there around future-proofing our facilities so that if other things come around the corner, because obviously something's gone wrong with Rye Pool, that what's happened, about making sure that our facilities are prepared for whatever. I mean, I know it's hard to prepare for things you don't know what they're going to be, but to try and sort of future-proof things a bit more and make sure that there's less risk involved in the facilities that we're providing. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, the sort of strategic SEAL group, of which I'm a member, have received a bid with regard to Rye, and it could also be looked at. That could be a source of funding for future-proofing other facilities and upgrading as well. So it's probably a difficult one because at some stage you'll want a serious amount of money, but I think it's being looked at. So that could be a useful thing. Now, what have I got here? Councillor Cortell.
Thank you, Chair. The vision was strong on swimming facilities, and in Bexhill while retaining our swimming pool, we've had the £23 million grant last week from the Department of Levelling Up and Housing and Communities, and in view of that, I think to achieve social cohesion across the district, we need to be conscious of the potential loss of Rye Swimming Pool, and this would have a negative impact on health. And several of the comments have been about Rye Swimming Pool, and I'd like to suggest that we need to bend over backwards to make sure that we retain Rye Swimming Pool. I think the SIL panel is moving along the right lines, and we need to achieve every possible benefit for Rye to ensure that swimming pool is not lost.
I wouldn't disagree with you, Councillor. What I don't want to do is go down the whole route of just discussing Rye Swimming Pool, because this is the whole strategy. Obviously, we all want it open, and Ben can give us an update. And I understand that Hazel, Councillor Timpey, has been working with the Town Council closely, and others. So, Ben?
I think, just the first point of information, the Levelling Up Fund announcement is in no way related to the Bexhill Leisure Facility, and therefore doesn't sort of add any security to the long-term future of that building, over which significant risks still exists. The other thing to mention is that, obviously, since we discussed the Rye Swimming Pool, we've had more information with regards to the government's energy support scheme, which doesn't specifically cover leisure as an area. So I know that Deborah and her team are working with Freedom Leisure to review options across our leisure service and what the impacts of that decision will have going forward. So at this stage, as the chairman has said, we don't want to sort of make this specific to Rye Pool. And I think we just need to look at the strategy that's being proposed in its wider sense and the benefits that can bring in over the 10-year period.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Barnes.
Thank you, Chairman. It was really an observation on where the responses came from. So clearly Bexhill was top of the poll. But I was quite interested to see that Battle was right down on 7%, which makes me slightly query why Battle didn't feel that they wanted to reply. But my point, actually, I think has been answered really by the question from on the Rye swimming pool. But 15% only of people from Rye answered that, and yet it's taken up quite a percentage of this of the layout here. And now I wonder, maybe some of the surrounding villages may have actually chipped into that. But the villages themselves were only 28%, and there's an awful lot of villages, so where were they? So this is, to me, very centric on Bexhill, but it's also asking questions about Rye. Obviously got on their high horse straight away and dived straight in on the swimming pool issue. But somehow or another, there aren't quite enough answers to the questions in this in the consultation report. I'm still saying to myself, yeah, that was okay, but it wasn't an awful lot of people who answered it. Okay, we may be saying 600 or whatever it is answered it, but all the parish councils got an opportunity to answer it. What happened? How is the questionnaire jigged so that it comes up with such a strange percentage of each one?
To be honest with you, I looked at it and I thought it was about spot on, because 45%, if we take the district as a whole and the population, around about 45 to 48% of the population live in Bexhill, and then the rest of the district is made up, and you've all, you're just over the 55%, or around about the 55% there, except for one in Kent who was probably moaning about the swimming pool because he come from Wittersham or Stone. And Rye obviously had a 15% because there was a current issue. So I thought it was pretty well spread. If it had been, if 60% of it had come from Rye, then it might have had a skewed effect on something. But I thought personally, I thought the figures were pretty good to the sort of makeup of the district as well. So, Councillor Barnes.
Yes. 3 or 4 things. I think the questions could have been a bit sharper as somebody who did look at them. You've got a rather bland set of answers because you've got a slightly bland set of questions. They're very good. Clearly there's a lot of support out there. I was disappointed, like my wife, that so few parish councils, only 8 out of 40, took the chance to actually respond. But again, the town council in Bexhill was a notable absentee. So if these representative bodies, we probably need to find some other way of ensuring that they do give us feedback, because they are representative of their local communities and need to help shape a strategy which, again, the public don't understand. They are key partners. I think we've lost somebody.
No, we've lost ourselves.
Okay.
You carry on.
Yeah, they are key partners because they are responsible, either directly or indirectly, for most of our playing fields, most of our village halls, and an awful lot of our physical recreation is delivered in them. And so we've got an education job to do, but also a communication job, because if I were looking at my own parish council, I hope and believe we made a response, but I suspect we didn't actually identify one of our major problems, which is the absence of a recreation field. We lost it in 1940, and it's never come back. We have an option on it, but the option is conditional on it being properly drained, and there is no way the village can afford the kind of sum that is involved in the drainage scheme to get that field up and running. Your all-weather point, therefore, Chairman, is a good one, and it affects cricket as well, because you clearly need some all-weather pitches out in the district, although probably not village by village, but perhaps in Battle, perhaps in Rye, perhaps in Ticehurst is where you should be looking for that. They cost about 20,000 a throw. It brings me really to my main point, which is I'm a member of the Health and Wellbeing Task and Finish Group. And as with Rye, swimming comes up over and over again as probably the one area where the district council has to get involved, because with the greatest respect, whereas you can find people to actually run these things, the capital cost is something which really only the district council, possibly working with parish councils, who also have the availability of the PWLB, but clearly the leader in that has to be the district council. And we do need, actually, I think, to take swimming very seriously as a coastal authority, one with a high percentage of old people who will use this for recreation, but also for physical reasons. And it seems to me that needs to be one of the centerpieces of our strategy. I was a little disappointed with paragraph 23, I think it is. I think we do need to be fairly specific in saying that into our 10-year strategy needs to be the provision of a new leisure facility in Bexhill. We probably ought to examine the possibility of a Lido rather than an inland site, because with the sea sitting there, we might be able to make use of that. And Lidos seem to be going through a new fashionable development across the country in a way which leisure centres elsewhere are under pressure. So a number of thoughts there which we can perhaps catch in our minutes so that the Cabinet can take account of them when they devise the final strategy.
Thank you. There may be some sort of, if you're attempting to watch online, we may have a communications issue, or we may not. We're not sure. Lorna.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to sort of mention that in relation to other policies and strategies that I've been involved in the past, this is a remarkable response rate, actually. I think it's quite remarkable that we've got nearly 700 people to respond. I think it does reflect the geography of the district and the population, as Sam says, so very well done in that. It's not easy engaging people in that. But I think we do have to learn on the parish council front, and it's interesting. It might be interesting to follow up why they didn't take part. And I think, you know, we're going to be thinking about developing a new corporate plan soon, and perhaps we're not engaging in the way that they want to engage with us. So I think it's important to ask that question. On the other hand, you know, they do have a responsibility to respond to these things. But I think it's worth bearing in mind, and when we start to design any consultation process in the future around new policies and strategies, I think it's important to learn from what's happened before. But I think very, very, very well done, because it's an excellent response.
Thank you. Councillor Cook.
Thank you very much. I mean, initially, when most people will have assumed that leisure facilities is really all about swimming pools, indoor sports halls, and gyms. So I was really pleased to see that so many people responded very positively, mentioning cycle tracks, footpaths, cricket, football and bowls club pitches, and that these have been included. But I would like to see better promotion of these free facilities, which appeal to all ages, all interests, and also has links with health walks as well. Let's not forget our coastal green spaces, which will all have a much smaller capital investment. I too am very disappointed that so few people in Battle responded. We certainly put lots of alerts out. I know our town council did respond, although I stepped back from that consultation. But with 3 sports clubs and a sports hall, I should be chasing that up. So thank you.
Well done. Won't retire anybody from Battle who didn't fill that form in. I think there's one thing that sort of, I won't say it upset me, but it sort of, the Cabinet can make their decision as they feel. I think when we first discussed this as a committee, we sort of put in the key principle too should be the council's role is one of deliverer as well as enabler signposter to physical activity. The Cabinet decided to withdraw deliverer, so we're an enabler and a signposter. Now I get that because I assume the whole idea is that somewhere up the road we're going to need 20 million quid to rebuild Bexhill Leisure Centre, and the council obviously at this moment in time we don't have it. My argument would be that this is a 10-year strategy. So in the 10 years, this council will change twice. National government will change twice. However, we don't know. But there's already, I picked something up in the newspaper, National Press recently, and the NHS are now looking at should they part fund physical activity because they're spending 8% of their budget on things that can be avoided, if you like, through a bit of activity to help people out. So, in the next 10 years, there could be a massive step change from government who says, right, here's, ever many hundreds of millions of pounds, we need to get better swimming pools, better 3G pitches, better this, better that, better everything. And if we haven't got that in our document, could that be a detriment to us? I don't know. Councillor Palmer.
Chairman, you're saying very much what came up the other day at the Health and Wellbeing Task Force. The Health Service has got to take an interest in this. But if we do not act as the overall coordinator and provider, we are the people with access to the PWLB, so have the town councils, so have the parish councils. But somebody will have to take the initiative, and it won't be RALC. So I think we've got to keep provider in the strategy. It doesn't mean we are sole provider, but it does mean I think we have a leading role in actually ensuring that by the end of the decade, one way or another, we've provided that swimming pool in Bexhill. Personally, I would like to see Rye also up and running because it seems to be, if we can get the heating right over there, that should be able to run at a profit instead of at a loss. But let's not back away. This may not be a mandatory service, but with an ageing population, this is absolutely necessary to our people and their well-being.
Thank you. Councillor Maynard.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that Councillor Barnes has certainly said some of what I was going to say, so I won't particularly go over ground that other councillors have covered. But in terms of this nub of the argument, if you like, about provider stroke facilitator, I think that quite clearly any strategy should be aspirational. And I think that not to deliberately exclude a word when in fact there could be opportunities down the line would be foolhardy. I think that in terms of the strategy as a whole, while it is a decent document, would I have promoted it as a good idea to spend that amount of money on a strategy in terms of that consultation? Then the short answer has to be no, because I don't believe that it's actually told us anything that we didn't already know. I think that leisure is hugely important. I think across all parties around this table, I think that everybody acknowledges the benefits, both recreational and in mental well-being and physical well-being. I think that quite clearly there is consensus in the room around that. Where there perhaps isn't consensus is perhaps over the priorities of this authority in terms of its provision of leisure facilities. But we've been here before in terms of trying to work with neighbouring authorities, including that difficult issue of wet facilities. And quite frankly, I think it is naive to think that a private provider will provide a wet facility. They won't. That's clear up and down the country. They very rarely have any sort of profit, and indeed that a wet facility inherently is not a cash cow for any authority up and down the country. Where they do work, though, Chairman, is where you invest in facilities that encourage people to use them, and you provide quality facilities on a site where there are other facilities available. And anecdotally, I can remember many, many moons ago, and it's an interesting story, so I suspect that none of you will mind me talking about it, is back when I was a child using the old pool at White Rock. It was always quite interesting because everything was falling apart. It was a nice warm pool, but you used to count the cockroaches in the box that you had to collect your clothes. It was pretty interesting. But what it was an Olympic-sized pool. So it was well used. When the new pool went in at Summerfield and was opened by the Queen Mother back in 1980, and I remember it well as a member of Seagull Swimming Club, it was astonishing to see the uptake in people coming to use those facilities. Not just because it was shiny and new, but if you just take a step back 40 years, none of those other facilities had previously been provided in the town of Hastings. So there weren't volleyball halls, there weren't squash courts, there weren't, I think there were a number of different, there's gyms obviously now have come in since the 80s, but the point I'm making, and I hope well made, is that when you provide a wet facility accompanied by other things that people want to do, you can, as a family, for example, with a membership, you can go down. One of you might be a swimmer. One of you might want to go and play squash, which seems to be a dying thing these days. And even at Summerfields in the 90s, they were offering archery. These sort of things are what residents want to see. They want to be able to go to one place and enjoy the leisure facilities. So, in a long-winded way, which wasn't my intention, I support what Councillor Barnes has said in terms of having an aspirational document and including the word provider, because, and as I said earlier, we have been here before, but the fact of the matter remains that whether there's a unitary authority or not in the future, who knows? But in terms of working with other districts and boroughs in East Sussex about co-locating a wet facility, that clearly is on the table. And I think we need to be honest and upfront with the residents of Bexhill and indeed Rye and the whole of Rother that there may be an opportunity in the future to provide an all-singing, all-dancing leisure facility, and that might be a co-location between two districts and boroughs. That might happen in the future. And why would we want to kick that into the long grass? Why wouldn't we want to be aspirational in our hopes to provide quality leisure facilities? Of course we want to keep the Bexhill pool open. Of course we want to reopen the Rye swimming pool. But there has to be an aspiration of the authority, not just to take a step back and talk to interested parties in the private sector. I think there absolutely is a role for the private sector in this. But let's not be naive and suggest even remotely, that the private sector will provide a new wet facility, because they won't. And I don't think we should sit idly back and say that the NHS might provide us with a lot of funding in the future either, because I think we need to be realistic about that. But we also need to be positive and aspirational. And that's why those words are suggested by Councillor Barnes and previously suggested by this committee about us being a provider as well as enabler should go into that document. And if Councillor Barnes wishes to second that proposition once again, as we go around the houses it seems, us versus Cabinet, but the reality is, I do think, and again, and this is a genuine appeal across all parties, why wouldn't you want to be aspirational? Why wouldn't you want to put it in there instead of closing it down as an opportunity? Because there may be opportunities around funding in the future. I don't think it will come from the NHS, but there may be other opportunities. And again, if we talk about bids, we've just seen the success recently of the Levelling Up bid. There may be a leisure-focused bid in the future from either this government or a future government, and especially if they're talking to more than one authority, we may have a genuine ear from central government. So let's not be pessimistic, let's be optimistic, let's not be glass half empty, let's be glass half full. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Councillor Timber, you're the portfolio holder. Anything you wish to say on the matter?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Lorna. I mean, the response is excellent for this sort of consultation, and but I don't agree that it's hasn't told us anything new, because it's told us various things about people's change of how they're doing their leisure, which we really needed to evidence. And health and well-being, I don't think if you go back to previous strategies, those words would appear. I may be wrong, I haven't read them, but I doubt it. So I think this is, as far as being aspirational, I think this is an aspirational strategy. And as far as I'm aware, when you write a strategy like this, it is high level. When you come to the nitty-gritty of it, things can change. Nothing is set in stone. So if, for example, as Councillor Maynard alludes to, something wonderful comes down the pipeline from government, of course you would take advantage of that. But it's not there at the moment, so you have to think of other ways to meet the need that is in the district at this time. But a 10-year strategy, when you're planning something, 10 years is an awfully long time. However, we've got to start somewhere. And I think this strategy, this consultation provided an awful lot of evidence out there for support for what we are trying to do. And I really would like to thank Rachel and her team, because it's very, very disappointing that the parishes, for example, didn't care to respond. And I don't know if that's through laziness or through lack of information or because the district councillors didn't actually bring it up. I really don't know why the parishes just thought that, this wasn't actually important. So it is quite worrying, that, and I don't know how you make them respond, Lorna. I'm not sure, because it's critical that everybody takes part, because you don't want to have things skewed with a certain response. So overall, I think this is an excellent document, and I've listened with interest to people's comments, and I think the general consensus is it's a good strategy. And the recommendations that are in here, Rachel and Joanne, who actually put together these responses, they've really outlined everybody's response. And Councillor Barnes is quite right, there's an awful lot of time taken up with Rye Pool, but that's because an awful lot of people made those comments. So it would have been wrong for us to leave them out. But we did respond to everything. So anyway, that's enough from me. I just think it's a wonderful piece of work, and I do hope that Overview and Scrutiny recommend to Cabinet that they approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. I will just say all my parishes knew about it. Whether they responded or not is another thing, but they knew about it. I've got two more. I've got Councillor Coleman and then Councillor Barnes, and then I'll come back to you, Deborah, after that. Is that right? Yep, okay. Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Chair. It's almost a shame that the meeting's not being live streamed at the moment, but I wanted to say I think I agree mostly with Councillor Maynard, actually. I think the addition of provision in the strategy is a useful thing to have for the future. I mean, I know Hastings Borough Council recently talked about the fact that they're going to go for a round 3 of the Levelling Up Fund for a leisure facility, and by the sounds of it, quite a big one. And it would be a shame for us not to be able to, or not to be able to as easily get involved with that, because our strategy is going in a direction where we're not being a provider. That said, obviously government funding is far from certain at the moment, and without government intervention, I don't think we could necessarily be a provider. So there is that caveat, and I don't think we should make being a provider the full sort of force of our strategy. But I think we need to leave that option open. I think that's why this committee added that in, is so that it's there if we want to provide those facilities in the future. So I agree with Councillor Maynard.
Point of order, Chairman. Can you actually record that Councillor Coleman said?
Councillor Barnes, I'm just aware we've been 50 minutes on this one. So.
I'm going to move that we approve the recommendations, but with the addition that we reiterate our belief that really a provider role needs to be put in a 10-year strategy. How that's delivered, whether it's delivered in partnership, I'm happy to accept some caveats, but if it's not there and the government come forward with saying that leisure is now part of levelling up, we will not be ready to move forward on that. The other thing, just to reassure Councillor Timpey, Etchingham took on the partnership with the school to build a superb village hall. You might have said it's stretching Etchingham, but when you actually look at the servicing cost of a PWLB, it actually, spread over 50 years, is not an unbearable burden. So it's not all disaster because you can spread your loan that far and service it ongoing out of revenue as well as actually it's not just a capital provision.
Seconded, Chairman.
Thank you. I had a sharp intake of breath from Toby. Right, what have I got? We've been moved and seconded. Councillor, are you going to be really brief? If you're going to be really brief, then
Thank you, I can be. Yeah, I just wanted to point out, following on from Councillor Coleman's point about demographics, that 86% of respondents were 45 or over, and that means that we're missing a large section of the population who use leisure centres. And I think that that is possibly skewing the results of the consultation. And I think Councillor Timpey possibly needs to bear that in mind in terms of looking at the change in how people do their leisure. I think it would be different if more under 45s had replied.
Deborah, anything you want to say as the sort of lead on this?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add a little bit of clarity to the key principles number 2. The Council's role is one of enabler, signposter and deliverer where possible to opportunities to be physically active. So although it doesn't use the word provider, it does have that aspirational desire to be a deliverer. So I don't want to get into semantics of it, but I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Right. Well, it's been moved and seconded. Have you got any sort of? You got the gist of anything, Lisa?
From what you moved before, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What the committee recommended previously.
Yeah. Basically. Cool. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Rachel, if you're still there, thank you very much. If you've been disconnected, I'm wasting my time. Moving on, item 6, draft revenue budget 2023-24 proposals, pages 23 to 40. Purpose of the report to receive the draft revenue budget 2023-24 referred from Cabinet to this meeting from the 9th of January. Report recommendations arising are reproduced below in the minutes of that meeting. Appendix 1 should be read in conjunction with this report. Resolve that any comments from this committee be considered by Cabinet when setting the draft revenue budget on the 6th of February, which then goes on forward to Council, obviously. Tony, this one is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So just a very quick recap of where we've got to. This is the second phase of the budget setting process. If you remember, there's 3 phases to it. There will be a final report that goes to Cabinet on the 6th of February, which will pick up any comments from tonight's meeting. And then that will inform the council tax setting report at full council on the 20th of February. So it's a follow-up to the first phase report, which was the MTFP report that we took to this committee back on the 21st of November, I think it was, and then that was forwarded to Cabinet on the 12th of December. The headline figures, the 23-24 revenue budget deficit of 2.2 is about £2.2 million to be funded from usable revenue reserves, and that's detailed in Appendix A. And that would bring the usable revenue reserves balance down to about 5.1 million by the end of 23-24. Much of the detail has changed since we took the first phase budget report, but remarkably, the bottom line has changed by something like about £16,000. That's not to say that the first phase was a superb effort in forecasting, Chair, but it's just a bit of a quirk of fate. But nonetheless, the situation hasn't deteriorated since then. As I say, there will be a third and final phase report going to Cabinet on the 6th of February. That will be updated for a progress report on the financial stability programme and also to update the budget forecast for business rates. Now, usually we'd be able to put that in the report that's gone to committee tonight and to Cabinet beforehand, but because the local government finance settlement was very late this year, I think we got it on the 19th of December, and there also was an announcement about business rates revaluations. It's made crunching those calculations that much more difficult to do, so we weren't able to achieve that in time for this report. But we're not expecting any huge changes from what you see in front of you tonight. I'll pick up on a few key points, if I may. Paragraph 5 it was very relevant to me. I was quite pleased with this because there is a Section 25 statement in there about the assumptions that the CFO has to make around the budget setting process and the adequacy of reserves. And this picks up on, if you may remember, this picks up on reports from the LGA peer review and the external auditor's value for money recommendations. One of the recommendations in the external auditor's value for money report, which advised that we should emphasise, or the CFO should emphasise, the Section 25 statement of the Local Government Act a little bit more forcefully. So I've added in some greater context to that. So that's a sort of a box ticked, if you like. The reserves issue, and I will talk about that again a little bit further down the line, if you like. It is my judgment call as CFO that 5.1 or a reserves level of 5 million is adequate. Appendix D indicates what would happen if reserves fell below 5 million, but the intention is absolutely not for that not to happen. It might happen. I can't forecast what's going to happen 12, 14 months down the line. It's, as I said before, it's difficult enough doing that 12, 14 days down the line at the moment, but that's hopefully given members a little bit of clarity around the reserves position. So a few more key points from the report. The budget assumptions in paragraph 6, whilst we've updated the figures behind them, the actual assumptions themselves haven't changed. Government grant funding is a bit of a good news story for the council. It's increased by £168,000 from 22-23, which is just over 10%, and that's detailed in paragraphs 17 to 23. If members require a bit more detail, I'll have to say I was quite pessimistic when I wrote the first phase budget report around what the level of government grant funding would be. So to be, I think actually, in fact, if I remember rightly, we were expecting a decrease of somewhere around 250, 300,000. So to have an increase of 168,000 was a bit of a boost. But that being said, of course, with inflation running very high, particularly in the areas of something like waste contract, for example, where I think the inflation calculations worked out something like £540,000. 168,000, without wishing to sound ungrateful, doesn't make much of a dent in that. But as I say, it's a welcome bonus that we weren't expecting. I've put a little bit in there about what's known as our core spending power. This is basically the council's available resources. So that's adding together government grants, council tax and business rates. And our core spending power, just to put it in a bit more context, that's only gone up by 5%. And that's because we can't increase business rates and council tax by the 10% that we receive for government grant funding. So whilst we did get that additional money there, the actual overall increases of available resources is only 5%, which again is better than we were expecting. But as I've just explained, for reasons I've just explained around things like inflation and so forth, as I say, it doesn't make much of a hole in this, and the situation has deteriorated since we made our first original forecast last year. I just want to say something about the financial stability programme, because whilst we haven't got numbers in front of us, we will need to deliver on the financial stability programme and possibly identify additional savings if we are unable to meet the targets of the FSP. I'll say a little bit more about that in shortly, but it's no mean feat ahead of us. It is going to be challenging. So the local government finance settlement, we received that on the 19th of December, and it's a 2-year settlement, which is an improvement on what we've had in previous years. We've had for the last several years now, I think we've had 1-year settlements. So this gives us a little bit more certainty going forward, which is handy for financial planning purposes. We've had the sort of acts of the Fair Funding Review hanging over us. Now that, as part of the local government funding settlement, it was announced that would be delayed until the new Parliament. So whilst the risk is still there, it's not as imminent as it may have been last year. We don't receive any revenue support grant. I don't recall the last time we received RSG money. I'm sure it's not happened since I've been here. In fact, there's a complicated calculation that sits behind the revenue support grant. In actual fact, it works out that we would actually be having to repay back revenue support grant or a negative RSG, but that's never been requested of us, and the DLUHC in the announcement categorically removed that threat from us as well. So that's one other less thing to worry about. We can increase council tax by 3%, which generates about an additional £30,000 of income. So again, it's helpful, but it's not going to change too much for us. In paragraph 14, I just wanted to give a bit of context on that particular issue, Chair. I've outlined what precept increases are available to our near neighbours, our preceptors, should I say? And you'll see that they've all, the police, crime commissioner, and the fire service and the county council all have greater flexibility in terms of their council tax increases. I don't know what they are yet, so it's not to say that they're going to take those up. But as a shire district, whilst we fared better than expected in the funding settlement, we still lag behind other local authorities in that respect. So on the financial stability programme and further savings, we will report that in the third phase budget report to Cabinet on the 6th of February. As I say, the further savings are crucial to try and keep us above that £5 million level, if you like, and give us additional budget flexibility should we hit problems in 23-24. And we have already started work on that particular process through the service planning process. I don't want members to underestimate the scale of challenge that lies ahead. It's a big figure to find. All I would say, to try and put a bit of context into it, is that this time last year we weren't expecting electricity prices. Well, kind of a bit of a clue about electricity prices, but we didn't really know how much they'd go up by. We had no idea that we were going to be hitting the levels of inflation that we've hit. Yet, despite all of those challenges, our latest Q2 forecast predicts that we will nonetheless stay just about within budget. So it can be done, but it will be tough. It will be difficult, and I don't want. I can't underplay that enough, I'm afraid. One final point, actually two final points were made, just to come back to this issue of reserves, because the DLUHC are starting to home in on reserves a little bit more, and I've put in paragraph 36 of the report that they're scrutinising levels of reserves held by local authorities, because they actually, by and large, went up during the pandemic. Now, we know that didn't happen for ourselves, but there is a sort of an expectation, I guess, from the central government that councils will use reserves to plug any funding gaps in 23-24, whilst maintaining a prudent level of reserves. Now, we've always had that as a plan anyway, so that's not it's not particularly new to us, but that's always been our plan. But as I say, the fact that we're doing, there is an expectation on central government's part that that's what's expected from councils, rather than cutting into services. Now, the other point I want to make about reserves is that we've had previous discussions around what's a suitable level of reserves and so forth. The problem we have with this particular equation, if you like, is that there is no equation. CIPFA have never dictated what that equation might be as to what should a suitable level of usable reserves be, and neither of our external auditors. And so there's no universal definition, and local authorities can use different makeup, or can make up their equation, or not make it up, but they can use a different definition to what we may use as a small district council as to define what the levels of reserves are. So I think when we have these comparisons with other local authorities, we just need to bear that in mind, that we may not always be comparing like with like. So it's useful to bear that in mind. Just one other point, if I may, Chair. The budget consultation process is still ongoing. That ends on the 31st of March. As at the end of last week, we'd received 105 responses, which is somewhat disappointing, because I think last year we had 275. We've issued reminders to people to get their views across to us. And just to give a flavour of some of the responses we've had so far, what should the council do when under financial pressure? Should we streamline services? Well, yes, that's a great idea. Should we introduce charges? That got 34% support. Should we reduce services? Got 27% support. So you can see that there's already some sort of conflict there, if you like. 65% agree we should prioritise the most and protect the most vulnerable members of our society, if you like. And 60% were in favour of providing services via partnership. So that's just to give you a bit of a flavour of the consultation itself. That will go as an appendix to the Cabinet report on the 6th of February, and obviously members will be able to scrutinise it much more closely then. So that's it from me, Chair. Nothing else to say, and I'm happy to try and field any questions as usual.
Thank you, Tony. Got Councillor Maynard, then I'll go Councillor Clark, and then I'll go and over this side. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I've got to be honest, I'm a bit disappointed in terms of the role of this committee is to scrutinise. Tony Baden's mentioned the report going to Cabinet, but there are two live issues in Rother District Council that I think that all members are aware of, but the devil is in the detail, and that's the role of a scrutiny committee. And specifically, I'm talking about Blackfriars and about the financial stability programme. I mean, I sat here last year, I can remember talking about wanting to know where we'd make those savings, was given assurances that detail would be given. And here we are, still with no details, because the raw figures, most of them are there, in terms of areas of search, in terms of what that's likely to look at, in terms of the services that we have as an authority. In terms of that budget setting process, we as scrutiny members need to know about that. So it's a little bit cart before the horse, because scrutiny should be looking at that, and I'm not sure where we're looking at that, because that's for me is the key issue. Because to a layman, and again, this isn't a political point, and I hope that members on the other side of the fence will take this in the manner in which it's intended, but the savings that this council's got to make as we go forward in terms of that financial stability programme, we all need the chance to have a conversation about those. And there may be differing priorities, there may be different aspirations for the councillors around the table, and indeed around the whole chamber when it comes to full council, but we need that information for the Scrutiny Committee. The same in kind sort of applies to the Blackfriars, because obviously we all know how Blackfriars will hopefully be administered. But again, the devil is in the detail, and I don't know whether the directors know and we don't, and I appreciate that there are difficulties there. But we need to know about the capital budget for Blackfriars. We need to know exactly how the finances of Blackfriars are looking, because in terms of the integrity of the authority, whilst it might be a standalone company delivering it, we need to know about those figures and how they might impact upon this council's budget as we go forward. And again, there's social media has a role to play here, and sometimes that's quite a negative role, because again, we've seen comments on social media blaming it on the council in terms of the shortfall in terms of the Spine Road, but everything's rosy within the housing company. But I'm not sure it is. And again, there's a role here for the Scrutiny Committee as well. And on a third issue, and again, Chairman, I'll hold my hands up and say guilty as charged, because I think Councillor Coleman and I might agree again. Because one of my major concerns, and it's within the budget report, and I accept it's in there as a small line and it's not a lot of money, but for me and for the electors of Rother as a whole, it's a big thing. And that is the changes around the Elections Act 2022 and around the changes in terms of voter ID required when the elections take place in May. Because I see that the government has provided us with £32,000 in terms of I'm assuming that's for an information campaign for electors. But councillors need to know, and indeed the general public need to know, exactly how that information is going to be disseminated. And I suggest, and again, I'm using this as the platform to say this because I hope that all councillors will agree with me, but I think that I'm concerned that it's not only about ID in terms of, if you haven't got photo ID, but there are some other parts to that act that we need to be absolutely clear with the public, because I'm sure that many of you around the table, for example, that haven't looked at the bill, won't know, for example, if you're registered to postal vote, that postal vote would only last for 3 years. So there are some serious issues around this issue. Personally speaking, as Councillor Coleman and I have exchanged views on Facebook about this, and I think we're in broad agreement, and it's frightening, isn't it? And that is that it was too soon to the election to be making these changes, and if you're in an electoral cycle, you want to be putting out the public information about this as far away from any election as possible. The time for doing this was, frankly, in June or July of any year, so that you're in the right place in the electoral cycle, because I think people will be running around like headless chickens, trying to get postal votes and trying to get voter ID before this May election. And I think this is hugely important, and excuse me for taking up a bit of the budget type debate to talk about this, but I think members need a briefing, whether that's a written briefing or an oral briefing from the Electoral Services Officer prior to Council. But we obviously, as local members, will go out and tell the public. And we have £32,000 of government funding to get this information out. But I think members want to know how that £32,000 is being spent. Clearly, in terms of when we send out the council tax demands, there is a massive opportunity there to tell residents in very clear language exactly what these changes are likely to entail. I suspect, and again, I'm sure I speak for all political parties when I say that most political parties will be encouraging people, I think, to get a postal vote as we go forward. I think there's unanimity in the Chamber about this, but I'm really concerned that all members know exactly what these changes are, and it's not just simply about voter ID, that it's about, the period of time, for example, that you can have that postal vote, but that we know as members exactly how this authority is going to contact residents, what they're going to do, how that £32,000 is being spent. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Lorna, you've been working on sort of the financial stability. Is there anything you want to add to answer any questions?
Yeah, I mean, I will talk about the financial stability programme, but can I just pick up the Election Act issue? We did have a briefing. When was that, Lisa? I think it was November. Was it November? That I think members attended, and that presentation's available. Doesn't mean we don't need to keep up the comms, though. And that money is for communications. I've noticed some councils have started, and I think we're about to. We need to think about a targeted approach and how we reach people, and using every mechanism we possibly can to get the message out there. And councillors have a huge role to play in that. So I absolutely agree. It's really vital that we get those messages out. In relation to the financial stability programme, we recognise that the original financial stability programme isn't going to deliver in quite the way that we planned. But we have put in place the savings programme, which has been undertaken through service planning. And from what I've seen so far, it's very, very promising with what's coming back from the services. I have to say, you don't always get a set of service managers and heads of service that embrace these kind of processes. It can often be quite a negative thing, but I've been really, really impressed with the way that our heads of service and service managers are coming up with ideas. We've already had some of them back in. The deadline's not till the end of this week, and we've started looking at some of the ideas. And Councillor Maynard is right that we will need to share those ideas and need to apply some kind of methodology and prioritisation to what gets taken forward. And I think the discipline of every time we add something to our spending plans, we need to get into that discipline of thinking, well, what don't we do? So that's something that I think is it's a bit of a culture shift in some ways, but from what I've seen so far, some really sensible, good, solid ideas. Many will need business cases as they come forward. There's other things that are just no-brainers that we can take. So obviously we're considering the impact on service delivery and trying to minimise that and the impact on our customers. And those ideas need to be brought forward. But they are ideas for the next financial year, as in 2024, 2024, 25. Have I got those years wrong, Tony? It's basically not this year, which is 23, 24, so it's 24, 25. We have, but it will take a long time to implement those ideas. And as much effort, in fact more effort, needs to go into implementation than just identifying the savings. So just a word on devolution. Obviously that was a big part of the financial stability programme. And we're on track. We did say that we would, our first phase of devolution would be to focus on Bexhill Town Council and the 14 public conveniences that we're working on devolving at the moment. But we've already started the engagement with parish and town councils for the following year, phase 2, and we've got communication going out to all those councils at the moment with the hope to actually take those forward as well. So this balanced approach of increased kind of focus on our savings approach and taking forward the ideas from the original FSP as well. So more of that to come, and I think there's a bit of extra detail in the final budget stage, which will be coming to Cabinet shortly.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of points I wanted to make. Funny enough, Elections Office sent us a link today, and I was looking at what is required to vote in the way of identification. So it is on the link from the Elections Office already. So it's quite useful because I will then give that out to my residents. I wanted to talk about finance because that's basically what we're trying to talk about. Because we're restricted in what we can increase the tax amount by, and Tony's already said it's not a great amount of money anyway, then we have to look at savings. And I do agree with Councillor Maynard to a point, because we need to be given the information of where those possible savings are. Because what I don't want is to us lose any more staff, because the previous administration and this one have done a good job in keeping the services running we've got with about 20% less staff than we had a few years ago. So if there are succinct savings we can make, then the scrutiny committee needs to know what they are. But I do get very concerned about the possibility of further staff redundancies. And as an aside, what gives me a wry smile is we worry about our council tax, which is about 12% of the total bill that people get. But the police authority can tap on an amount, because the government says they can, a precept, which is more than what rather increased is. And that's almost like backdoor taxation, because the government should be fully funding the police, not saying, well, tack a bit on Rother, they can afford it, So, they don't make it easy for local government at all. But I really think we need to be totally clear and succinct about, are there savings we can make that will protect staff jobs? Because that must be very important to us.
Thank you. Councillor Cook.
There's a surprise, me asking questions about the budget. There we go. I notice on the Cabinet meeting minutes, Appendix 1, page 37 of the document, CB 22/61, it says that an assumed council tax collection of 98.3%. I mean, are you expecting an increase in the number of non-payers because of the cost of living crisis?
No, that's not. If I may, Chair, that's not been the assumption. And if you remember, or if you might recall, we take the quarterly monitoring report to Overview and Scrutiny Committee and Cabinets, and within that report there is a couple of paragraphs about collection rates. And at the moment, our collection rates have held up well, certainly compared to last year. That's not to say that they will hold up again next year. It's uncertain, but our rates have held up. Our collection rates today have held up well, so we've not changed the collection. We kept it at 98.3%. I think we've kept it at that for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years now. As I say, last year, I think, I'm doing this off memory, Chair, so please take it with a pinch of salt, but I think we collected even more than 98.3%, although some of that, I think, was picking up on arrears. No, so to quick answer, we haven't updated it from 98.3%. The reason being because our collection rates so far have held up quite well when we compare them to last year.
So thank you. And if I may ask a quick supplementary, please. Do we get rates from Airbnb and holiday lets?
No idea, Chair. Apologies. I'll have to go back to the head of Revs and Bens and get that information. I've been asked that question before and I can't remember what the answer was, I'm afraid. So, sorry, I can't remember, Councillor Cook, and I'll go back and get that for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's something that's in the work programme. It has been in the work programme for some time. What is the potential effect of sort of Airbnbs and holiday lets? I know in some elements, some parts of the country, councils have seen 80-90% of sort of small coastal places becoming totally holiday lets, and people get sharp to it and turn into businesses. And so, yeah.
I was just going to say, I am by no means the authority on council tax, so please take this as something that was discovered through the tourism task and finish group we did a few years ago. Is that basically you're supposed to, I believe, register for an NDR, but keeping yourself on normal council tax means you get your bins collected. So if you register yourself as sort of a rental property, then you have to organise your own bin collections through a private provider. So most of them don't do that because it's cheaper to actually just keep paying your council tax. Now I say that not as an authority on council tax, but as a piece of evidence sort of that emanated from the task and finish group we did a few years back. So.
Councillor Barnes.
Yes, Chairman, I'll begin with a comment on elections. I don't want to follow Councillor Maynard too far, but we've already started to get good information on photo ID as ward councillors, and I see this week it did actually go out on rather alerts. It worried me, like Councillor Maynard, that there are many other changes on which we were briefed at the ESAL conference, which are just as important in a way and are going to create difficulties. So I hope our elections office is going to brief us on those. Again, if the communications can be relatively short, even if they're numerous, we have an e-bulletin in the village, and we can put the communication out to about 600 people. But if it comes in a long document, that's much harder. So a series of short documents would be the way to do it. And there are many bulletins, I think, across the county to do that. Turning to the budget, I have a number of questions. I don't know how you want to handle these, Chairman, but let me begin with the first. I'm looking at the draft revenue budget, which is in Appendix A, and I notice housing, community and neighbourhood services are going up from 8.2 million to 9.4 million, and then for some reason they go down by another 600,000 on the forecast. I just wonder what explains this bump, or are we being optimistic for 2024-25? Because it seems to me that to go up to over 9 million and then come down again to about 8.8, 9.4 to 8.8, somehow we've got to make a huge saving there, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to do it. So it's a genuine question.
Yeah. So I've got two. Sorry. Yeah, thank you, Chair. The large increases are mainly around homelessness, increases in the homelessness budget, and the anticipation or the hope, or whatever you wish to call it, is that it won't be as high from 24/5 onwards. But clearly that will have to be something that we have to review when we get to the budget setting process this time next year.
My second question is in a way been anticipated by Councillor Maynard, but we must have, if we're going to deliver 1.98 in the course of this year, we must have some idea how much of that is income and how much is savings. And we must know something about where we're looking for those savings. I would have found it helpful to have even the broadest indication of how we're going to get to that 1.98. We know that the other 2.2 is going to come from reserves, which leaves us with a fairly massive problem next year. What I'm looking at, well, let me ask the first question. Have we no further information on the 1.98 at the moment?
Chair. At the time of writing the report, I cannot report what I don't have. So at the time of writing the report, we didn't have any more information, but there will be more information that we'll disclose as part of the budget report that goes on the 6th of February, as I said earlier. I can't report what I don't have.
Just to get clarity, the 1.98 is on top of the savings you've already made through the Financial Stability Programme. I ask because when you look at the forecasting, we keep repeating the 2.2 million figure, as if we hadn't achieved it in 24-25. So am I taking it that the basis of those two figures presentationally is quite different?
If I may, Chair, you did ask me this question earlier, Councillor Barnes. I did respond. The 1.988 million, if you just sort of try and take, sort of look at it theoretically in a sense, if you like, if we make that as a permanent saving, and I emphasise the word permanent, then clearly that would leave the 2,048,000 would then, we'd only need to fund a further 60,000 on top of that, if you see what I mean. So if you take one away from the other, the difference is 60,000. The emphasis or the key thing to note there is the word permanent. Hopefully that helps.
Question is again partly anticipated by Councillor Maynard, is we are taking advantage this year in our figures of a very substantial drop in servicing costs on the capital programme. And in some ways, I understand that, but obviously it creates a budget pressure next year because those costs are clearly going to go up. I am concerned, and it's probably more for Audit and Best Fairly than this committee, but we have the Spine Road running months behind now and costing roughly double what we thought. If those figures are broadly right, well, it's costing us 4 million. Well, that's a figure that's being quoted in an FOI. If it's wrong, then we need to get it correct. But what it is causing is huge delays on the Blackfriars programme. And I think we do need to be conscious that the housing market is beginning to look rather less good than it did. And we do need to take a long, hard look, it seems to me, at Blackfriars to make sure it is actually going to be viable on the timescale that it will now have to be delivered. I think I need to ask a question about that.
Without jumping sort of in on Tony's stuff, I think part of the issue with Blackfriars was the presentation of the FOI request, in that it was asked about the contract, the fixed sum part of the contract, and what's the current contract cost. Now, we received £8.75 million towards the infrastructure. The contract, the first part of the contract with Brahini's was 4.1 million there or thereabouts, off the top of my head without having the figures in front of me. It was always anticipated that the eventual cost of the road was going to be up at that 8-point-something million pounds. We are experiencing the potential for an overrun on the cost, but it's not anywhere near as what is being portrayed as a result of that FOI. What we are seeking to do is get clarity on those costs with the final design work at this stage, and we'll be giving members more detailed briefing as we go through that process. So I do want to reassure members, yes, we know that we recognise that there is an overspend against initial projected costs on that road, but it's not quite as bad as what's being portrayed, and that's primarily my fault for poor presentation in terms of a response to an FOI where I gave very strict interpretation of the question rather than sort of giving a broader outlook on exactly where we were. So I think that has caused some consternation, but I think we just need to be clear that the anticipated cost of the road was always much greater than the 4-point-something million pound contract, which only related to I think it was the 56% of land holding that we held at the time.
I'm grateful for that. We were promised a detailed statement by the Chief Executive. I think we probably need that. So that we're all in the picture and not actually guessing. It would be good to know how far we're behind and what the impact is really on the delivery date on the housing.
I always thought, going on the Blackfriars, I always thought that was the case, that when we was in the council, we got a grant many years ago for 4-point-something million quid, and then Tony Leonard went back for an extra bite of the cherry, and we got another 3.8 or something like that, 4 million. So I always thought it was around about the 8 million quid mark. So, Councillor Courtauld.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of issues. The first one is concerning salaries. The assumption is an increase of 3% in next year's pay round, which it's a point I've raised before. I take the view that this assumption is too low and that possibly it needs looking at again. My second point is about homelessness, and I noticed that an additional 240,000 will be needed in 23-24 over and above this year's overspend, taking the additional cost to $500,000. I think this is a realistic reflection of the situation on the ground due to the fallout of the cost of living crisis being projected into an increase in homelessness. I'm concerned in paragraph 26 that the senior management team are intending to seek to reduce this £500,000 forecast. How will this affect homelessness? Will we see an increase of people on the street, an increase of people sofa surfing, or will that mean a reduction in staff, possible redundancies? How do the senior management team expect to mitigate this £500,000 increase? I'm concerned about what effect it will have on services.
I think to a degree I may be able to answer some of that off my own back. Having listened to my briefing last week, I asked a question as well with regard to the increased, because as Councillor Barnes would expect, and most of us would expect, that as we invest in more property, which we now own, with the idea of reducing the cost of temporary accommodation and bringing it in-house, if you like, so we save money. Joe explained that, well, it's actually gone up because there's more there's more demand. Now, if you went back 5 years, we didn't have sort of any facilities. We've now got 24, I think, or something like that, and we're going to be approaching 30 by the end of this financial year. So that's good. The bad thing is more people are needing it. And so that's why the cost, we would assume that you invest to save. We've invested to sort of stand still and have an additional cost as well. How we get over that, I'm not 100% certain. I assume that we're hoping that maybe it's a blip because, as you know, during the COVID time, evictions were banned. Obviously, evictions, can now take place, and if people run into difficulty, they end up on our front door asking for assistance, which is what we have to provide. So maybe it's a blip. I think it lines up again. Who knows? Have I sort of answered that half correctly, Joe, or yield to your knowledge?
Yeah, no, it's very, very well put. It's a challenge. It's the difference between a saving and avoiding costs we would have otherwise had if we hadn't done it. So we've reduced the budget essentially by £300,000 on the back of having invested in properties. So that is being accounted for. It's just not demonstrated in the budget. I'm probably less sanguine about the future. I think unless something fundamentally changes in terms of what's causing the problem, which is a lack of housing, being new housing coming forward in a sort of policy sense, and that's through successive decades. It's going to continue to get slowly more difficult and more challenging for households out there, especially on low and medium incomes. And there's no immediate. We can do a lot to reduce the impact of the symptoms, and we are doing as much as we can. We perform very well compared to our neighbouring
boroughs and district to that end. But in terms of addressing the causes, we're limited on what we can do at this level of government, really.
Thanks, Joe. I hope that answers part of your question of whether it answers all of it, but obviously you've got a concern. It's probably the same as what we have as well.
Yes, it's really the causes rather than the symptoms that I'm concerned about, and how are we going to squeeze that budget? What will the impact be?
Yeah, Chair, the purpose of the sentence in paragraph 26, and I think we discussed this earlier, Councillor Courtell, it's a big budget spend, a big area of spend for Rother District Council, and it's quite right, I think, that SLT have to start actively managing those areas. There's no inference in the report as to how we're going to do it, but we do have to clearly look at what our options are, and Joe, as head of service, will be working to bring bring possible options forward. So that the purpose of that sentence was to make the point that something that has had such a huge increase in budget such as this has to be actively managed at SLT level. I think that's something that the external auditors would certainly look for when they're looking through our budget report. There was one other point I wanted to make about the pay award as well, if I may, and the assumption around the pay award. That's my, frankly, if anybody can predict me what the pay award's going to be next year, then great. I'm happy to take it on board. But it's not an easy thing to predict, as we found out this year. But what I would say is that my assessment of 3% is my assessment, but it is not my decision. The budget process doesn't drive what the pay award should be. Members make that decision, not the budget report nor the budget process.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, just very briefly on, just to say that again, I agree with Councillor Maynard in terms of something's in the water, obviously. In terms of the voter ID situation, I think we possibly might disagree on the motives behind the changes, but I think we both agree that the changes have come too close to the election. Certainly, my residents in Sidley and areas like Sidley, disproportionately, I think, will be disadvantaged by that extra sort of hurdle to getting to the polling stations. And I think we all benefit, and society benefits, when we have higher turnout in elections and greater participation in our democracy. So I think I fully agree with Councillor Maynard on that point. In terms of the financial stability sort of plan going forward, and I think Councillor Courtell's mentioned it in terms of homelessness as well, and what Joe said to some extent, yes, there are the symptoms, and I think we're all aware of the symptoms, but we need to really look at the causes. And I'm going to avoid being political if possible, but there is a macro cause to this, and that is consistent lack of central government investment in local authorities. And I know I say that having when we've just received sort of some money towards Sidley from the Levelling Up Fund, but that fund was very tight and narrow and specific about what the money was for. And it was very hard for authorities to compete and get that funding. And it's only down to the hard work of our staff and all of the people that have been involved in that process that we managed to get that funding. But there should be funding available for other things as well from central government. And as long as central government aren't funding local authorities, us and every council are going to be in this position constantly, where we're having to make tough decisions about how we avoid cutting services, how we avoid losing staff, whilst keeping a balanced budget. And I don't envy anyone such as Tony or others in the position of being involved in council finances in this current time, because it is a hard time to be involved in that, and not a pleasant time, I don't think. What the answer is, I don't know, without sort of getting political. The other thing that I wanted to mention is... No, I've forgotten my third point, but I think I've made the crux of what I wanted to say, which is that there is this macro thing looming over all of us, and that is a lack of central investment. And I've just remembered my third point, Chair, which I think I mentioned before, which is I think when it comes to financial stability, we really need to be looking at what our priorities are and what are the most essential things for us as a council to be delivering. And that is why I think discretionary services, as important as they are, some of them, we need to start looking at what we can do to save money in those areas before we start looking at our core services or number of staff or things like that. And I think the devolvement of discretionary services to parish and town councils plays an important part in that. And I know there's a lot of talk in the public at the moment about sort of double taxation and that term. Obviously, that's a very sort of loaded term. I actually think we need to get the message out that far from double taxation, it's almost like half taxation at the moment, because people get far more services from Rother than we're funded to deliver, and that's why we're in a deficit. That's why we have all of these issues, and we need to either have that money come from central, or we need to find a way to balance our budget. And it's a very tough time, and I don't know what the answer is apart from a Labour government. Thank you, Chair.
Again, time is marching on. So, Councillor Barnes.
I don't remember enormous generosity from the last Labour government to Rother District Council, but we'll hope springs eternal in the Coleman breast. It would be useful actually to understand, I think, what an extra % of pay will cost, because that will give us a ready reckoner. I assume, because through you, Chairman, to Tony Baden, that because he's left in a contingency sum, he has some room for manoeuvre if pay went up. My other question, really, I suppose, is through you to Lorna and Ben. Are we exploring the possibility of investment in AI? Because there are ways, I think, in which we could make more efficient use of our manpower if we did some capital investment in some of the technology. And that might actually be a useful way, I think, of having a more efficient service and more efficient use of the brains of our staff.
Absolutely. We've sort of done a bit of a soft launch of an in-house AI project chatbot that is on the website at the moment. I think this is an area that's going to need far more development in the future. But more generally, it's not just AI, it's looking at all of our digital processes and trying to do that, quite an old-fashioned term now, channel shift. We're still not there. We've still got some way to go. And actually, I think we need far more focus. I think there's been, we haven't focused on the digital programme as much as perhaps we could have done in recent years. So I think that's going to be important, bringing that back into central focus, and it's very much going to be part of our financial stability programme. And actually, digital is going to be a theme within that, which will definitely help to drive out some cost and improve the service for the customers as well. So, yeah, I think it's really important that we renew our focus on digital AI and opportunities that come from that.
Thank you. I am. I'm just going to say that I think one of the most important aspects of this report is the honesty and the transparency, particularly within the FSP. I really do. And I'm sure Lisa has been amazing at noting down all our comments, and we'll pass them on. So therefore, I would like to move this report as it is, with the comments from our discussions tonight, as we move from the second phase to the third phase.
I think sort of we've got to sort of highlight the work that's going on. Yeah, Tony.
Sorry, Chair, I couldn't quite move quickly enough. It's an extra percentage point is roughly £120,000, but that's a rough estimation. But it's there and thereabouts.
Yeah, which is sort of stark, because 1% on the council tax brings in about 35 or so, doesn't it?
I should have clarified that as well. That was the 30,000 is the difference between being able to raise it by 3% and being able to raise it by £5. Sorry, and I didn't make that clear, and it occurred to me it occurred to me a bit later, and I forgot to mention it. But usually the referendum limits are 2% or £5. That's what it's been for quite a few years now. That's now changed from 3% to £5. And for us as a council, assuming that we raised by 3%, it makes a difference of about £30,000.
Okay. Good. Yeah, I think we should just sort of confirm the need for Lorna's work in the sort of going forward, looking for the savings, basically. It's been moved by Councillor Cook. Who wants anybody want to second it? Councillor May. Oh, Councillor Gray beat you in by a hand. All those in favour? Thank you very much. I think I have to finish off by saying I think this is Tony's last scrutiny meeting, which is a shame. Well, it's for us, probably not for him. He's probably bound to be gone, I expect. But Tony's moving on to pastures new at some stage. So all I will say is, as a committee, Tony, thanks for your assistance, guidance, and work with the council over the previous years. Thank you. Yep. 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 Thank you. Right. You can go home now if you want. Item 7, review of the housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy, part A. You'll remember that we requested this be put into two parts for some reason, but there it is. So we got a part A and a part B. So we just doubled the pain tonight. So I don't know who's taking it, Joe or Graham. I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I'll be dealing with part A. I won't go back over the reasons why. As you say, Chair, you've introduced that. Thank you. So this report will deal with priority 1 and priority 3 of the housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. So recommended that Cabinet be requested to agree the targets achieved as listed in Appendix B, removing those from the Improvement Delivery Plan replaced with the amended targets proposed at Appendix A, and that progress made against the strategy included in the Improvement Delivery Plan, Appendix A, be noted. So I'll just take you through the highlights of the report. I'll skip over paragraphs 1 to 3, just around how we've structured this update that you're all aware of. So, affordable housing delivery, priority 1, increasing the supply of housing. We are seeing a good number of registered providers being involved in affordable housing delivery in the district. Part of my role is to continue trying to grow that number of registered providers that we actively work with. We are still to some extent reliant on Optivo, who are now Southern Housing Association, having completed their merger just before Christmas. They are still the primary deliverer of affordable housing in Rother. Orbit second, Hastow third. Really, it is structured like that. Southern and others, though, as it says, are operating in a very challenging business environment and a very competitive environment in many ways, where they tend to focus their activities, their efforts. If those efforts and strategic resource aren't directed into Rother, then we will see a drop-off in the delivery of affordable housing as a result. So, as it says, essential, therefore, that the Council continues to ensure that Rother is an area where Southern can work well, and let us continue to see strong levels of affordable housing delivery. Okay. Moving on, paragraph 6 and 7, talking there about the macro factors of housing development, inflationary pressures, finance costs, as we know, materials costs relating to a wide range of factors outside of the council's control. just to give members a quick example of the finance costs that we've seen on development schemes. So, just about all development schemes are funded by borrowed finance. And we've seen, so 18 months ago, I was seeing finance costs on development appraisals of 5, even 5.5%. Now we're seeing 10, 11, I've been quoted 12% on one delivery appraisal. So that's having a really big impact on what developers could afford to bring forward. And that has a knock-on effect on how much affordable housing comes forward against our policy requirements for delivery of affordable housing as well. Okay. Carry on then, down to paragraph 9, which does mention that we've had schemes where no affordable housing is being delivered. So a scheme comes forward, viability challenge is put forward, and we don't see the affordable housing coming off the back of that. That continues to happen, and members will be aware of just last week, Strand Meadow in Burwash, where we secured a viability review, and we could all hope that that will secure some funds that we can use to provide affordable housing elsewhere in the district. But that scheme of 30 dwellings that should have provided 12 units of affordable housing will not, because of that viability challenge that the developer successfully put forward. Coming on to some good news, community-led housing, I think, is a real string to our bow here in Rother. We've got a very good relationship with the Sussex Community Housing Hub that we have an SLA with. We part fund along with a good number of other local authorities in East and West Sussex, which led to the delivery of the first community-led housing scheme in East Sussex, in Icklesham, late last year. So known as Orchard Close, those 15 units, 12 for rent, 3 for shared ownership, are all now occupied. A great scheme. And the CLT there, the Community Land Trust there, are looking to work on a second scheme, apparently. I don't know what the site is, but it's testament to that thing of if you set these structures in place, then we can look to start securing a better pipeline of delivery. The Community Housing Hub are also working with Bexhill Community Land Trust, as I'm sure you're all aware, on the Cemetery Lodge site at Turkey Road, and that scheme continues to move forward. I've listed there other areas with activity taking place at different stages. Paragraph 13 notes that the Community Housing Fund that we received from government in 2017-18 is now almost entirely spent. As a result of that, we've been looking at what other funds we can access to help support affordable housing development, community-led housing development specifically. And that was where the paper, which members may have been aware of for Cemetery Lodge, was put forward to use Section 106 planning obligation funds. That's a route that I would seek to explore more, seek to do that more often, and to have a pipeline of use for that money, to have a strong, there's going to be viability challenges. We're going to see a drop-off in delivery of on-site affordable housing, and we may see a drop-off in how much money we can get instead as well. If we've got a strong route where we can use that money quickly to start bringing schemes forward, then I think it puts us in a much better position of, reacting and not having that strong delivery mechanism. Okay. There's a brief update here from the Rother Housing Company. I don't intend to go through it all, other than to note that the business plan was adopted in February last year, and that commitment to deliver 1,000 new build homes over 15 years. And as we know, Blackfriars is the flagship scheme of the housing company. Again, I don't intend to dwell on that now, but if there's any particular questions, then I'll do my best to answer them. Our planning policy colleagues are assisting greatly in creating that better environment, that good environment for affordable housing delivery. I'm working closely with with that team. And again, we know the local plan, the revised local plan, is being worked on now. The Regulation 18 draft consultation is expected later this year. And as members may be aware, a technical advice note to support wholly affordable housing schemes was agreed by members last year. So it's a good indication to registered providers that we are a council who will support such schemes if those schemes are right for this council. I think we all appreciate that sometimes those schemes a scheme may not be right for whatever reason. But where they are, I think that document helps to put us in a good position for those conversations. Our colleagues in environmental health, going into priority 3, have continued to inspect private sector dwellings and operate proportionally under the Housing Health and Safety Rating System with their inspections over the past year. Modern methods of construction, paragraph 21 there. Yes, it is definitely an ambition of the strategy that a scheme delivering modern methods of construction comes forward. That hasn't happened yet. It is something that myself and officers working on housing development here are looking to bring forward. But again, we haven't got a scheme actively in train at the moment, but it is still an ambition that we're working towards. So, to conclude, our numbers for 2022-23 in terms of affordable housing development are looking good, as it says in the text there, over 100 numbers. Having been able to tally the numbers a bit more and get a bit more certainty since writing the report, we're looking at, I believe, probably 129 for 2022-23, which is the highest that I've seen looking back on the Excel sheet for a long time. So a really good delivery. That does mean that we are likely to see smaller delivery numbers next year. We're likely to only see, it looks like, between 60 and 70 in 2023-24. And to give some context for members, our average over the last 5 years, taking into account that 129, is around 92 dwellings. So it does fluctuate. And finally, to note that the strategy, the Housing, Homelessness and Rough Sleeping strategy, is entering its last year, a 2019-24 strategy, and officers are meeting later this month to begin conversations about a successor strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. I mean, as you said, it's probably, anyway, it is disappointing to see sort of places in, I think, Godden's Gill in Norvium was first mentioned to me when I was an original Rother Homes board member back in about 2000, I think, 2000 or 2001 or 1999 even. So, you know, I went through there recently and see there was, you know, action going on in building, and then there's no affordable, which is a shame in a village such as Norvium, and Councillor Mooney would probably agree. And also to see other people now sort of, you could almost argue, as we're not online, I can say, you know, developers sort of wheedling out of obligations and saying, oh, we can't afford, it's unaffordable and all this stuff to provide low cost housing. Well, that, to me, when they buy the land, they should, if you're going to buy a plot with 10 houses, you know, let's say 100 houses, you know that 30 of them have got to be low cost affordable. Therefore, you don't want to pay for that land. You're paying for the 60 or 70 houses, and the infrastructure's got to be put on them. And those ones, you're just going to get your money back on it. So you don't want to pay for the land. The fact that they come in here and pay for the whole lot and work out their costs over 100 houses, and then whimper and grizzle that they can't get it because their costs have gone up by 10%, is poor to me, and it must be so frustrating for you to miss out on it. So I've got a number of hands up. The first thing I want to do, as we've mentioned, the housing company, should I get a declaration of interest from Councillor Courtauld and Councillor Byrne, is it? Councillor Clark on that, just to cover your back.
Yes, apology for overlooking that.
Oh, we are still live, but not on that screen. Whoopsie doodle.
Yeah, we are.
Well, not on my screen, it's not. Just so I didn't say anything really bad, wouldn't it? Councillor Clark. I've got a number of other members.
Thanks, Chairman. I want to make a few general points. Joe said he didn't have a lot of optimism that the situation in housing could improve in the short term. And he's absolutely right, because I've got local knowledge from my ward. I think there'd be more people going onto the housing waiting list, because after Liz Truss short term in office, 7 of my tenants moved back in with their parents because the rent went up by £200 a month, they couldn't afford it. So a lot of people, you won't get the figures for that, have had to go back into their parents' home. And the other aspect of that is, within about a few months, I'll get phone calls saying, I'm 72, I don't want these young kids running around my house forever. How do I get on the housing waiting list? Because it was only supposed to be a short-term solution. They come and live back with me, so they would be going on the housing waiting list. And if you want the evidence for it, I recently got our new elections register, and I've never seen so many households that have 3 or 4 adults living in them than they were years ago. You can go through it street by street, and you've got 4 adults in one. But that is because they can't afford to move out. Now, one gentleman, he's 45, he's got a well-paid job, and he's got a 12-year-old daughter, and he was driven out by that extra increase in his rent. So you won't get figures for that, but these people could funnel through to the housing waiting list, you know.
Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Chair. First point is on the Optivo Southern Housing merger, and just to raise, I think, some concerns of my residents as well as myself in terms of how the provision from Optivo or from Southern Housing is going to be going forward. I know, for example, the building they had in Sidley, they've now vacated, so there's no longer a base in Sidley High Street, although I think they're still in the orangery from time to time. So they are still kind of accessible, and I have been reassured by staff from Southern Housing that they will continue to be present in the community. But nonetheless, there are fears, and I'm sure I'm not the only council that's had quite a lot of issues brought to my attention from residents about the quality of housing, particularly it seems with Optivo, and I think there's a challenge there about obviously I think most of our social provision is better quality than a lot of our private provision. Certainly there's a lot more issues where there are private landlords who aren't looking after their properties properly for whatever reason, their financial situation or whatever else, and if they do look after it, there's an expectation on the tenants to increase their rent as a result. But nonetheless, there is still an issue when it comes to social housing that's meant to be there to support residents who are, for one reason or another, in need of that housing, but that housing is not acceptable standards. And it seems to be quite hard to get through to our social housing providers to get them to actually improve a lot of the situations, particularly on the outside of buildings, but also on the inside. We will all be aware of the issues with mould and damp and stuff that have been in the news. And between that and sort of the issues we're facing with viability assessments and things like that as well, I see that there will be a need in the future for perhaps the return of council housing. I mean, I would certainly hope so, but also greater reliance on the community land trusts and that community-led housing initiative to bring forward decent quality homes that can be provided for particularly social element, but also more widely the affordable need. I also hope that in the future we might see a greater percentage of affordable pushed for by this council, even though I know the viability issue makes it harder for that to achieve, because we have such a huge waiting list, such a huge issue with residents who are facing homelessness, facing temporary accommodation, and it gets to a point where actually we just need to say, as much as these mixed developments are lovely, what we need is social housing. We need houses that people are going to afford to live in, and we need it now. I think my next point is around the viability issue, and this issue's come up in planning. It's come up again and again and again, and I really think we need to find a way. I know it's a national. I think it's a change of law really that's needed, but how developers can get out of providing an affordable element at a late stage by saying that a development's not viable anymore. Oftentimes it seems with costs that they should have known about beforehand when the viability assessment was done, and a cynic could say that it's perhaps done retrospectively like that to try and enhance their chances of getting planning applications through. Obviously I wouldn't accuse anyone in particular of doing that, but that's certainly how it can come across. I think the housing company is going to face issues going forward, and we're trying to get the land to build the housing that it needs. And even if we were doing council housing, I think we'd still face those issues as well, because a lot of land is just being held by developers, and when they are building on it, they're only wanting to build quite low affordable percentage. So that's another big issue with this. And I think, again, without a change in compulsory purchase laws and things like that, that's another issue that's not going to go forward. So I think I agree with, I think one of the things you mentioned in that report, which is about the need for more housing on a macro level, just more. We need proper house building, affordable house building, quality house building. And until that happens, I think this is sort of the best of a bad situation. I would very much say thank you to everyone in our council and our staff on the housing teams. It's not an easy job at the moment. And you're doing a tremendous amount of work and to very little yield, unfortunately, because there is that need for that macro element. So thank you very much. And I hope it gets better in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Mooney, I'm just aware it's 8:45 now.
Sorry, I'll be brief. Just to straighten out the points that you made with regard to the development in Northiam. The original development was for accommodation for the elderly, both private and social. Beautiful job. But even though I intervened personally, the parish council wouldn't consent to the access, and they promised them a car park out of it at the end of the field because it was going through the playing field, and it changed hands 5 times over 7 years. In the end, the social housing people, our providers, intervened and got what they got, and that's why the site was becoming more unaffordable, and that's what really happened. It's a tragedy, really. It wasn't that they went in, trying to make a quick buck and without providing social housing, not at all. They were nice, very nice plan it was. And Goddenskill was going to close. So what they had to do was refurbish Goddenskill because they never got the social housing. That's the full story. Thank you. Sorry.
Councillor Barnes.
Chairman, first point I wanted to make is really around the current inquiry consultation by the Department of Levelling Up. I know that our planners are planning to put answers in, but I hope our housing people are being drawn into that. One of the things I should like to see in particular is that viability assessments are done at the outline stage and not at a later stage, and should be binding unless a new factor, a genuinely new factor, comes to light. And I think we ought to take advantage of this questionnaire from the department to make that point quite strongly. There may be other points which are relevant. Some of them are clearly going to ease our situation, but they won't actually ease our housing situation, because we do actually need new houses. Really brings me to my second point, which I think probably we need a new village. And I think we ought to be working together, planners and our housing people, with the thought of identifying something and doing land assembly. Because I can't see us cracking the rates simply relying on private developers in our own company. However, short term, I think our own housing company could do somewhat more with prefabricated construction over sites that we do own. And I have in mind the car parks behind our village hall, behind our town hall. And also, we might look at some of the other car parks to see if we couldn't put prefabricated construction. You don't lose many car parking spaces, but you own those sites, you own the space over them. A properly designed prefabricated construction would actually, something which our housing company could take forward, and I think very cost efficiently, because so much is land price at the moment. Again, another thing I would like to say to the government using this planning questionnaire, levelling up questionnaire, is the advent of the developer who doesn't build, but actually buys the land at an inflated price, then sells it on to the builder, is one of our problems, and that needs much more regulation, much more hammering away, and we need to persuade the government that there is a major problem there. We probably ought to do a little more creating a landowners forum where we actually get in to some extent as a developer and buy the land for our own building company. And we recommended back, Charles will remember this, we recommended an annual landowners forum. I don't think we've ever held one. And I think we could, in using our housing company, take on a little more of the role of a developer and not simply a commissioner of building. I'd like to know a little more about some of our sites. Lyd, for example, a small site, but a useful one. But can I also recommend that we begin to look at the possibility in the high-wheeled area of working with small builders to provide them with capital and share in the profits. We currently have sites in Burwash Weald and in Burwash where the developers have run into financial problems. And again, it seems to me we have access to capital. We need some income for the building company. Working with the small builders on small sites in the high Weald, I think could generate some useful income. Number of points there, which I hope can be minuted and taken forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Now I thought we'd got away with prefabricated houses this evening.
Social housing providers, we couldn't possibly have that going on. What should really happen is when we give consent to a planning application, we should make conditions that houses are built to that specification within 5 years and nothing else. That would be much easier. Sorry.
Right, time's marching on. Councillor Quartal, if you're quick.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm most impressed by the range of initiatives that are being used to address both the quantity and quality of housing. I was impressed by both reports, and I've got a couple of concerns, though. The first is about Southern, which is in a quasi-monopolistic situation. I'd be interested to know what percentage of the registered providers it covers in terms of dwellings, but I would guess it's over 90%. that with taking tenants for granted and having poor quality maintenance, that is a problem because we still have to work with them as a council because they're a monopolistic provider. And a slightly minor point, the private rented sector, there are a few rogue landlords, as we know, and I noticed in the report that 5 homes during the course of 1 year were due to be improved. I wonder whether we could be a little bit more ambitious and perhaps up that target to 10 properties. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maidley.
It's a very, very quick one, Chair, but it's rather an unfortunate typo, which I yes. Oh, you beat me to it. I thought that was rather unfortunate. Item 10 is a folly instead of fully.
Yeah, we don't want to build follies and not have anyone live in them, do we? Right, well, we're resolved here. Cabinet be requested to agree that the targets achieved be listed in Appendix B. Listed in Appendix B be removed from the improvement delivery plan and replaced with the amended targets proposed at Appendix A. And secondly, the progress made against the housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy included in the improvement delivery plan, Appendix A, be noted. Happy with that? Yeah. Councillor Coleman moved.
Can we, though, ask the housing company to look at some of the ideas that have been put forward in the discussion? I know I've got a personal interest in this, but I do think, while I'm very congratulatory what has been done, but I think we could do more to actually crack the forward. And so I don't want to criticise the recommendation, but I want to add to it.
Oh, well, Joe can take that back to the housing company, I'm sure. Yeah. Seconded by Councillor Cook. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much. Right. Thank you, Graham. Agenda item 8, which sounds extremely similar to the one we've just had. This one resolved. Cabinet be requested to agree the targets achieved in listed in Appendix B be removed from the improvement delivery plan and replaced with the amended targets proposed at Appendix A, and progress made against the housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy, including an improvement delivery plan, Appendix A, be noted, which sounds exactly very similar to the previous one. Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just to remind members, it was a request of this committee that these reports come in 2 parts, which we were keen to agree and acquiesce with. But, you know, reflections are welcome too. They are short reports and for noting. It's also, I don't think there should be anything in either report that's a surprise to members who are, you know, routinely listening to cabinet reports and keeping an eye on what's happening in the housing and homelessness world. So we will be discussing in terms of future work programming, won't we, around the frequency of these. But I hope as we've been discussing in this committee under various reports, that the challenges that homelessness faces, I hope there's some reasons to be cheerful in these reports. As I say, I won't go through in masses of detail. We did have a visit from the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities last year, which was positive in many ways and highlighted the strengths of our other tenant finder scheme as an area of good practice. And we've had inquiries from other local authorities up and down the country as a result, and trying to find out how we're operating that and the successes that we've had. There's also the recommendation that we review our allocations policy, which with the timing of the elections means we've got stalled slightly, but we'll be coming forward with revisions to that end. shortly. And also they noted the high level of demand we've experienced alongside other areas of the South East post-the COVID crisis. So the report goes on to talk about our accommodation initiatives, which I hope people are familiar with. In particular, our Housing First accommodation, which specialises in supporting rough sleepers. We've been able to harness a net additional gain of 1.2 million from Homes England as a result of that scheme, and we perform very well. I think that's one of the highest successes compared to other local authorities in East Sussex. We do very well out of that scheme, and we have 12 units of accommodation in existence as a result. Our wider temporary accommodation purchases are still going from strength to strength, and we have around changes every week at the moment, but we should be at about 30 properties by March this year. We're on around low to mid-20s at the moment. We also piloted a management scheme with Optivo, now Southern, to see how that goes, and we'll be looking at commissioning a RP to manage our temporary accommodation going forward, because they can bring in extra income, which is a useful idea, which we want to make clearer and explore in more detail. There's also a range of initiatives around support services, which I hope those reading the report will have noted. Also, our multi-agency work is going from strength to strength. In particular, we've commissioned a new post in partnership with Public Health, trying to link the housing and health agendas, make them more integrated, and also try and harness, make ourselves more aligned to the health agenda to try and harness grant funding, etc., and investment from that sector. So, yeah, a lot of good work. I picked out some highlights for you, and if you read through the report, there are others. But it's a challenging time, as I say, and I don't, there's a danger of a bit of a boy who cried wolf with homelessness, and constantly saying how extreme and challenging it is. But at post-COVID, things have certainly shifted a gear, and it is the housing crisis ensues, but it has definitely shifted, and we are reacting. We're bringing in more investment. I'm putting business cases to the senior leadership team on an investor-save basis, which will hopefully minimise the rate of increase. But I think we are, like the rest of the South East, faced with a situation where there will be increases, and it's about how well we manage that, as opposed to achieving necessarily reductions in demand. That's not the same as lower costs per unit, as it were, or per person rather. People aren't units, but you know what I mean. But happy to take questions on the report. But yeah, it's a challenging time that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. To be honest. Any questions on this one, Councillor Barnes?
Not a question. I really would want to offer congratulations through you, Chair. I think this side of the strategy has progressed extraordinarily well, and I think we ought to be congratulatory about it. I think it's an innovative set of services. We're getting some interest from outside. I trust that will go on. The two areas which I would quite like to explore further, and maybe they can be looked at when we're looking at the new strategy. One is whether, since I would want on the one hand, for social reasons, to encourage people to buddy up, whether we can find some way of temporarily leasing the houses rendered vacant to make use of them ourselves until the people who budded up either go into homes or die. How you do it, but it seems to me there are an awful lot of large houses out there. The owners don't want to actually dispose of them and go down, but they would make them available, I think, to us if they move in with somebody else and not be lonely. That needs looking at. The other one is there any way we can help people to record their rents as part of their credit rating? Because that seems to be quite crucial to get onto the housing ladder. People would find it easier to get a mortgage, given the high level of rents, if in some way those rents could be incorporated in a credit rating for the mortgage company. And that might be worth looking at as a housing authority, because we really want people out of what is not very good private rented accommodation in this area and onto the housing ladder if we can possibly do it. And it might be something worth looking at. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cortell, then Councillor Barnes. I would like people to be sort of brief now. I know it's an important thing, but we're 9 o'clock, so yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'd like to reiterate what Councillor Barnes has said in congratulating Joe Powell and his team on providing a superb range of initiatives, and this area has been handled particularly well. I like the multi-agency approach, supporting homeless people to access training and get into work, supporting former rough sleepers who've had multiple problems and having a multi-agency approach to that. I could go on, I won't, but I'd just like to say I think this is very, very successful. I hope it can continue and that it doesn't get pruned back by the financial delivery plan.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Barnes.
Thank you, Chairman. We had in Etchingham a really good example of somebody who was a rough sleeper. But he had, I think, possibly an enormous number of mental problems. And just following his progress and knowing how difficult he was to pin down, it is, it's a matter of absolute amazement that anybody would have taken such a problem and actually then gone on to give that person hope for the future. But what I really wondered was, when you have somebody who's got obviously huge mental problems, and probably allied with drug use as well, and you're going to put them into one of this new accommodation that you have, how long can you actually, through you, Chairman, Joe, how long can you keep them in that accommodation, or have you got a maximum time in which to make the transformation from being an absolutely hopeless case to being somebody with a bit of hope for the future?
It's a challenging balance. It's very based on the individual, but we don't want to. It's important to have an end date so that people are working towards living independently, so they don't become institutionalised, as it were, in that supported living environment, because it isn't permanent. So we aim for 1 to 2 years, but of course, if people's recovery is never a straight line, it goes up and down. So if they happen to be at a down point at 18 months, we would extend it, on that individual's case. But what we like to see and what we insist on is active engagement, in the support element. So if people completely disengage from that, it can be difficult. But it'll be a year to 2 years. Sure.
Councillor Byrne, you are the portfolio holder on this. I'm sure you've got something to say on it. You've been sat there for 2.5 hours.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things. We know we do not have enough houses. And as Councillor Barnes has so rightly said, you can split those problems into two. Things that a district can do something about and things that only national government can do something about. And if you looked at Councillor Barnes' example of a new village, that's fine, but who pays for the infrastructure? Because no one's going to put new houses somewhere where there's no infrastructure, and we can't afford to build infrastructure in the hope of new houses. So that's the sort of thing you've got to kick upstairs, but it doesn't mean our strategies shouldn't keep harping on about these problems and making the people above us aware of that.
Now, what I do think is that both these documents, I've forgotten why we split them, quite honestly, but they have led us into very similar discussions, all of which are around how do we, there's no magic bullet, how do we tackle each of the pressures? And I like to think that their strategies and the great strength of what we're all doing, the housing team and everybody else, because I think we've got really good support throughout the council chamber and throughout Rother in what we're trying to do, which is mitigate the problems of homelessness either by improving the private rented sector, by keeping on developers to maximise the amount of affordable housing. This also, of course, the possible use of prefabricated or system-built housing. I would assure Councillor Barnes that it really is being looked at for every site where it could be appropriate. Please trust us on that, but I'm sure you will keep holding our feet to the fire on that one. So basically, what I'd like to say in just to round up is that both these strategies, I hope, show a global and imaginative approach to the various problems, and we're not at any point where it becomes a government problem, throwing our hands up in horror and saying, well, we can't do anything about that. Yes, we can. We'll keep nagging up there, and we'll keep doing the best we can down here. And I'm confident that we have the right officers and the right team to take us forward like that. Thank you.
Yep, I would agree with you there, Councillor. Agree with you wholeheartedly. Right, we've gone past 9 o'clock. Someone want to move this? Councillor Coleman, seconded by Councillor Cook. Everybody in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much. You can go home as well, Jack. What have I got here? Right, what have we got now? Key performance target. Page 79. Ben.
Thank you, Chairman. So members will notice there's a significant departure from recent KPI sets that we've been proposing. I think that's based on a lot of feedback we've received from both this committee and other members about how we've approached that. So I'm going to give members a bit of a sort of a rundown on how we propose to do reporting. I think it's contained within the report, but I think the first thing to say is that we're trying to move away from sort of outcome-based reporting, things that are sort of outside of our direct control, and refocus for the purposes of the key performance targets on just that, on performance, operational performance, things that we can control and things that we need to do in terms of our, the way we run the business of the council. And primarily, that's because it's things that we can control, but also I think this refocus is required on the basis that we are looking very deeply at how we run our services now as a response to the financial stability programme. And I think it's really important that members of this committee have that reassurance that performance remains at an acceptable level as we go through those changes. And I think whilst we're not looking to implement those changes immediately, I think getting that baseline feel for how operations perform and how specific services perform is really important, so that you can hold the organisation wider to account. What I would say is there's a couple of we're not abandoning the idea of sort of getting to know how our performance and how our operations affect those that live among us and those residents and businesses out there. So what we're proposing is that those sort of a lot of the current KPIs and a lot of other data as well falls within a State of the District report that can be presented annually to this committee, which I think shows those things that change slowly over time. The number of affordable houses that are actually being delivered is, we report that quite regularly, and yet the numbers don't really change. It doesn't offer members much insight as to the reasons why these things are occurring, whereas annual updates, I think, give members the opportunity to really focus in on things and then feed back into the operations of the business and how we might seek to address that through the change in how we monitor those. I have mentioned in there that the environment strategy, it's one of our key documents. It's one of our core principles in the corporate plan. We did try to include through the KPI set as it is now the carbon footprint of the organisation. It's really important that we keep monitoring that, but it's not going to change on a quarterly basis. It's going to change either through new reporting, we've discovered some new information, or through specific interventions that we're making. And again, those sorts of things should be captured either in the 6 monthly updates to this committee on the progress against the environment strategy, or in the annual State of the District report that we'll be preparing as part of this process. So under Appendix A, members will see the 26, I think it is, although I've been told that my counting may be off when I did the final count, KPIs listed there under the key service areas. So environmental health, which quite frankly is one of our better performing services, yet has historically been largely ignored in terms of key performance indicators, I think mainly because members generally reassured that it's running quite well. But I think it's really important that we highlight that where we are effective in terms of our operations and how we deliver those resources. Housing, again, we're looking at homelessness prevention and the average cost of TA per placement. So again, it's not the overall numbers of TA, which is need driven, which we've been historically looking at, but how much it's costing us per placement, and that's a direct result of the actions and the activity that we can take. And the number of homelessness preventions is obviously a reflection of how the team are working to keep people in the private rented sector and not allow them to fall into homelessness. Customer services, this is a range of measures that are looking to sort of give members a bit of a feel for how particularly the digital transformation work that's going to be coming forward is taking into effect. So it's, as Lorna mentioned earlier, it's about that channel shift, it's about providing digital solutions and making sure that we move those total number of contacts. Whilst total number of contacts may remain the same, it's how residents and businesses interact with us that should change over time, and that will be those statistics will be a direct reflection on the work that Lorna and those teams are doing. Neighbourhood services, we provided a number of KPIs around performance of the waste service. We've tried to move away from the percentage of waste that's recycled on the basis that actually it's not something that we can directly control. It's a behavioural issue as well as a service issue. It's actually something that's reported to us by East Sussex County Council. And so whilst it's important, it does influence the way we operate. It's not actually a performance. It's not actually indicative of our performance as a council. What we have tried to do here is demonstrate where possible that there might be an effect between the NES contract, which is the enforcement contract, and fly tipping. Fly tipping's been a key problem throughout the district, as you can see. Trying to just keep the average monthly recorded fly tips to below 70 will be challenging for us, and therefore that itself is actually quite an astonishing number. So what we would hope to see is that the impact of enforcement and well publicised enforcement might seek to reduce that number to acceptable levels. It states the total income from investment properties remains largely the same as we currently do. I think it's a key part of our financial stability in the coming years. We wanted to give some reflection of the performance of the corporate core aspects of our business, so sickness monitoring, in terms of our staff sickness levels, and the percentage of the FOIs that we answer within the required 20 days. Planning has gone through a significant change recently in terms of its operational performance. It's now performing at a much improved level than it was 18 months ago. I think that's generally recognised by both service users and members. What I would say is that, as with all of these services, the viability of that service always remains on a knife edge, and it's important that we continue to monitor it in detail, and therefore we've suggested these 4 KPIs for that. And then revenues and benefits. For those members who were here prior to the 2019 elections, you'll remember there was a point at which our revenues and benefits team went through a bit of crisis mode, and we had to intervene with sort of bringing in external support. What really this does is, to be fair to the revenues and benefits team, they've now maintained that level of good performance, and they've sort of found a working level in terms of the resources we put in. But again, it's just something to make sure that we monitor in terms of that, and making sure that our residents are receiving that support that they need. I'm not suggesting that we keep all of those if members feel that that's too many, but we wanted to make sure that you had a good menu to pick from, should you choose to do so. We are capable of reporting on all of these every 3 months. I would just say you're going to give the chairman of the committee a real headache if we do 26 and it's a full-on discussion every 3 months. But we are capable of reporting on all of these every 3 months, so it's not an issue should you choose to do so. Other than that, Chairman, it's down to the committee.
Right. Any immediate thoughts? My first one, when you mentioned publicity with NES. well, 7 million people on Jeremy Vine, BBC, ITV, newspapers, online, emails, and the rest of it. But there we go. We've got to make a start. Any thoughts? I've got to the time of day, but I'll just say, yeah, let's just do that. Be fine. Let's go on. But there you go. I can't really do that. So, Councillor Cortell.
I welcome the change of approach, but I feel we're being prescribed or advised to take on a list of targets which we haven't got any background on. It would help to have another column where we know what the performance is in the current year to date, to be able to make a judgment on whether the 23-24 proposals are reasonable. And I'd like to move that the decision on this be postponed to the next overview and scrutiny committee meeting, by which time we can have a second column with the existing performance to help us decide on the current targets.
How about the 24th of the 4th? Because if you see the next page, our next agenda for the 13th of March is even longer than this one already. So, Ben.
I would just say that these have to be agreed by Cabinet, so they're recommendations to Cabinet who set the basket. So what we could do, if it makes members more comfortable, is if you're happy with the KPIs that are being suggested and it's just the quantum of the targets that's at issue, what we could do is we could put forward the ones to Cabinet, and then when we come to Cabinet, which I think we're proposing to send this one to the 27th of February Cabinet, which is right at the end of the month anyway, we can make sure that these targets are produced and sent round to this committee in advance, and we can make sure that members of Cabinet have that feedback there. I'm just conscious that if we go to the 24th and there's no Cabinet before the election, we're not getting a Cabinet in before June, which means we don't have a set of KPIs until well into the third quarter of the year.
Yeah, I can agree. I can see exactly where you're coming from, Councillor, because we don't know if they're good or bad, do we? So I think that makes sense. Councillor Barnes.
Just looking at a couple of things. Whereas I'm quite interested in the sickness figures, it may be that they're better taken at the HR committee or rather than this committee, because they're not really, I think, the sort of performance we should be looking at, although it's important they're looked at. Like Councillor Cortell, I welcome the sort of a state of the nation. It's always seemed to me, assuming that all these things need to be reported on a quarterly basis, is a bit odd. The one I miss under housing is the number of weeks in temporary accommodation. Until we get that down a little nearer what we think is reasonable, I think we should keep reporting that one quarterly. It's the only one I think I missed of the ones we get at the moment.
I think both of those are fair. I think the sickness monitoring is reported on an annual basis through what's currently the Licensing and General Purposes Committee through their HR report. I'm imagining that will now go to the HR committee, depending. I'm not clear on the constitutional changes like that, but I know it's reported annually through the HR report that goes up. So we're happy. I'm happy to accept that comes out, and the weeks in home in temporary accommodation can go back in. I would say in terms of this, obviously, I think what we're trying to do is set a set of KPIs that will probably last the life of the next council. So should the initial targets be considered not stretch enough or too stretch, let's say, then they can be reviewed against performance, I think, this time next year as well. Because this is what we're trying to do is set a basis for the new council to come in and be able to really operate from in terms of our performance level. So I don't anticipate significant change year on year like we may have had in the past, especially if we're covering so many areas through this. So.
Yep. Broad agreement with that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, who's proposed it? Oh, Councillor Courtown.
I'll just be clear, Chair. Are we talking, Ben, about the paper that comes to Cabinet having this additional column with the current proposal? Sorry, current stats.
Yeah.
On that basis, I'm happy to propose.
Okay. So that's been proposed, seconded by Councillor Madeley. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you very much. Right, work programme, last one. Now, you'll see that the 13th of March is pretty full, and we hope that the Crime and Disorder Committee don't speak for 3 hours. So there's that. Then 23, 20, then we've just got hopefully a brief meeting at the end of April. And then, I think that, to be honest, once the elections are out of the way, and whoever's here will then decide. But given the meeting we had last Wednesday of the scrutiny review people, there was sort of mention there of same things in which we call bread and butter work, but they was almost saying you shouldn't be looking at them. Is that right? Did I sort of pick that up briefly?
Yeah, sort of. I think there's a lot of things we have regularly on the work programme. And I mentioned the environment strategy. I'm not saying that's the right one, but if you look through the annual review of the housing strategy, the annual review of the safety committee, the annual review of... And I think what was being suggested was that you shouldn't feel like you have to be wedded to all of those going forward. Oh, yeah.
And then don't forget, I wrote a little PTO. If you go over the page, you'll then see the items for consideration, of which there are a number. So a new council may or may not pick up on those, or may add to it, or kick them out. So,
Chairman, could I be so bold as to make a suggestion? The final meeting of this committee prior to the election is the 24th of April. It's very light. It's just the chairman's thing. I know everyone wants to be out in election mode or not, but it might be worth filling that one with an opportunity to discuss, to make recommendations to the future committee on what they might wish to consider.
Yep. Don't disagree with that.
Yeah. So, okay.
Give something there.
I'll draft a report.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, that's it. It's been a long one. Sorry about that, everybody. 9:25 by the clock. I haven't had anything to eat since 1 o'clock. I don't think I'll bother now. Thank you very much for your attendance. Safe journey home. See you next time.